The storm outside raged with an intensity that could only be described as primal, a furious beast clawing at the small mountain cabin. The wind howled like a living thing, smashing against the walls of the old wood with such force that the cabin seemed to shudder in protest. Snow fell relentlessly, piling up in thick layers, swallowing the windows and transforming the world beyond into a suffocating sea of white. Everything was swallowed by the storm, every sound, every movement, muted beneath its endless assault. Inside, the only noise was the steady crackling of the fire, the soft warmth it offered cutting through the heavy chill that had settled in every corner of the cabin. Dr. Margaret Hayes, a retired military doctor with hands that had once stitched. Together, the broken bodies of soldiers in the chaos of battlefields sat in an old armchair. Though her shoulders were weary and her hair was now more silver than gold, there was still a quiet strength about her, an inner fortitude that had been shaped by years of facing life-or-death situations. Across from her, her 12-year-old granddaughter, Clara, was curled up on the couch, absorbed in a book. The faint light from a single lamp illuminated her face, casting a warm glow over her features as she held the book tightly in her small hands. Despite the storm's fury outside, the cabin felt like a fragile bubble of safety, a small refuge that stood in defiance against the chaos. Margaret took a slow sip from her mug, her tired eyes drifting to the firelight as she let out a soft sigh. "Looks like we're snowed in for the night," she murmured. Clara glanced up from her book, her lips curling into a faint smile. "That's okay, Grandma," she said cheerfully. "It's kind of cozy." But then, just as quickly as the calm had descended, something shifted. A sharp, frantic noise sliced through the silence. It was a scratching, quick and desperate, coming from the front door. Margaret froze, her mug halfway to the table. Clara looked up, startled. "Grandma, what was that?" Another scraping sound echoed, louder this time, followed by a low, muffled whimper. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. The storm outside was a death sentence for anyone caught in it. So who, or what, could possibly be out there? The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Setting her tea down, Margaret rose slowly, every movement deliberate and measured. "Stay right there, Clara," she said, her voice calm but firm. Clara slid off the couch, clutching the edge of her sweater. The scratching came again, more urgent this time. Margaret's chest tightened. Someone or something was out there, and they were running out of time. Her fingers curled tightly around the flashlight as she made her way to the door. The storm outside roared louder, as if it could sense her every move. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she unlatched the lock and pulled the door open just a crack. The wind slammed into her like a wall. Icy air rushed inside, cutting through the cabin's warmth, and snow whipped in, stinging her face. For a heartbeat, everything around her was white, blinding, suffocating. Then, through the swirling storm, a figure emerged. A German shepherd stood in the doorway, its powerful frame trembling under a heavy coat of ice and snow. Its chest heaved with ragged breaths, each one more labored than the last. Steam rose. From its mouth, the effort of every breath visible in the freezing air. The dog's name was Rex. Clara gasped from behind her. "Grandma!" Margaret crouched slightly, her eyes locking with the dog's. There was no wild panic in its gaze, only a sharp, piercing intelligence and a plea, so raw, so desperate, that it hit Margaret like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a stray dog seeking shelter. No, there was something more. Around Rex's neck hung a battered, frayed harness. The worn leather strap screamed of service, of duty. This dog had been trained. Rex took a tentative step forward, nudging against Margaret's leg with his cold, wet nose. Then, with one final effort, he let out a low, urgent whine, the same sound that had pierced through the storm moments earlier. Margaret's chest tightened. This wasn't just a dog seeking warmth. This was a call for help. Clara edged closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma, look at his eyes. He's trying to tell us something." Snow swirled around them, the wind howling as if to warn them. Margaret glanced at the open door, at the storm waiting just beyond it. Something or someone was out there, and this dog was their only chance of reaching them in time. Margaret's experienced hands moved with the same calm precision she had once used on the battlefield. Her fingers brushed against Rex's fur, feeling the tremor running through his body. And then she saw it. Dark smears on the snow near his paws. Blood. His feet were raw, cracked, and bleeding, the pads of his paws torn from the miles he had run. This dog had been on a mission, and it had been running for a long time. "Dear God," Margaret muttered under her breath, her mind racing. She glanced up at the harness again. It was clear now Rex was a trained canine, but there was no ID tag, no handler in sight. Clara knelt beside her, her eyes wide with concern. "Grandma, if he ran through all of that—" She swallowed hard, gesturing toward the storm. "Someone's in trouble. Big trouble." Margaret met the dog's gaze again. It wasn't fear she saw in those eyes. No, it was determination. A silent message burned brightly in Rex's dark eyes. "Follow me." Margaret's instincts, honed over years of service, screamed at her. The same feeling she'd had in the most intense moments of her career. "Move now, or someone dies." "Clara," she said sharply, her voice firm, "bring me my medical bag. The big one." Clara didn't hesitate. She bolted for the closet, grabbing the battered leather bag Margaret had kept stocked for years, a relic from her military days. Margaret slipped on her heavy coat and boots, her breath fogging in the cold air. She turned to Clara, her voice steady. "You stay here." But Clara was already pulling on her parka, her chin set with determination. "No, you might need me." "Please." Margaret hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Stay close to me." Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, then bolted into the storm without a second thought. Margaret tightened her grip on the medical bag, feeling her heart race with anticipation. "All right, boy, show us where." The moment Margaret stepped outside, the storm consumed her. The wind hit like a punch to the chest, forcing her to hunch her shoulders and shield Clara behind her. Snow whipped in sideways sheets, so thick that the world became a blur of shifting shadows and white voids. Rex pushed ahead, his powerful form barely visible against the blizzard. Every few steps he turned his head to ensure they were following. His bark cut through the wind, sharp and commanding, pulling them forward. Margaret's body screamed in protest as every old bone and muscle ached under the weight of the cold. But she had been here before. Different battlefield, same fight. When a life depended on you, you kept moving. Clara trudged beside her, her small legs sinking deep into the snow. Her cheeks were flushed, breath coming in harsh bursts. "You okay?" Margaret shouted over the wind. Clara nodded quickly, but her eyes were wide with a mix of fear and determination. "I can do it!" They kept going, step after grueling step, pushing against the storm that seemed to claw at them with every gust of wind. Suddenly, Clara's boots slipped on a patch of hidden ice. She let out a startled cry as her body pitched forward, heading straight for a small drift. "Clara!" Margaret shouted, panic surging through her. But before she could reach her, a blur of motion cut through the snow. Rex lunged, his powerful jaws catching the edge of Clara's coat and pulling her upright just before she would have been swallowed by the snow. Clara clung to Margaret, trembling, but safe. "Thank you, boy," Clara stammered, her voice shaking. Rex let out a low, almost satisfied bark, then surged forward again. Margaret tightened her grip on the medical bag, her heart pounding in her chest. They were so close now, so close to whatever was waiting ahead. But she didn't know if they would make it in time. Through the white haze of the blizzard, a shape finally emerged in the distance. Margaret squinted, trying to make it out. "There," she shouted above the wind, her voice barely audible. "It wasn't a house. It wasn't even a cabin. It was a shack, small, weathered, and gray from years of storms." Snow had nearly swallowed it whole, and for a split second, Margaret wondered if anyone could have survived in such a place. Rex didn't hesitate. He bolted straight for the door, sinking deep into the snowdrift as he scratched and barked urgently. His voice wasn't panicked. It was commanding, like a soldier calling for backup. Margaret reached the door first, her fingers numb as she gripped the frozen handle. She shoved her shoulder into the wood. It resisted at first, then gave way with a groan, opening just enough to reveal the scene inside. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. A young woman lay sprawled on the rough wooden floor, her back pressed against the wall as if she had slid down in exhaustion. Her arms clutched something small to her chest, a bundle wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Margaret dropped to her knees beside her. The woman's lips were pale, and her skin was cold and waxy. When Margaret peeled the blanket back, a tiny face appeared, scrunched and flushed, letting out the faintest cry Margaret had ever heard. Clara gasped, her mitten-covered hands flying to her mouth. "Grandma, the baby!" The woman stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering. Her voice was a cracked whisper. "Please." Margaret pressed 2 fingers to her neck, feeling the faintest pulse. "She's alive," she breathed, then looked at Clara, her voice firm and sharp. "But not for long if we stay here. We move now." Margaret's training kicked in instantly. Years of field medicine flooded back to Margaret like muscle memory, automatic and precise as if she had never left the battlefield. Every motion, every instinct was honed in years of practice under the harshest conditions. Her hands, though weathered and aged, moved with the same rapid precision that had once saved countless lives. She tore off her outer gloves with practiced speed, her fingers working almost without thinking. Each action another step toward survival. From the medical bag, she pulled a thermal blanket, its fabric rustling as she unfolded it with expert hands. "Clara, listen to me," Margaret said, her voice sharp yet steady against the shrieking wind and the roar of the storm seeping through the cracked door. "We're going to save them. You need to hold the baby skin to skin inside your coat. It's the only way to keep him warm enough to survive. Do you understand?" Clara's eyes went wide with shock, her small frame trembling in the storm's grip. "Skin to skin?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper as confusion and concern flooded her gaze. Margaret nodded, her eyes locking with Clara's with quiet urgency. "Yes. Don't waste a second. Do it now." The command was soft but firm, a doctor's authority, and a grandmother's love wrapped into one. Without hesitation, Clara peeled off her scarf, her small fingers fumbling slightly but working quickly. She gently tugged the tiny newborn from the threadbare blanket. His skin was icy against her chest, cold enough to send a sharp jolt through her, but she quickly tucked him inside her coat, wrapping her arms around him, pulling him close. Her hands were shaking, but she whispered gently, "It's okay, little guy. You're going to be okay." Margaret's attention shifted back to the young woman who lay weakly before her. Without hesitation, Margaret slipped the thermal blanket around the woman's body, her fingers moving quickly and methodically as she rubbed her arms, trying to coax the cold from her frozen muscles. The woman's lips parted, barely moving, just enough to whisper. "Baby ... she murmured, her voice a fragile, breathless rasp. Clara leaned closer, her own heart breaking at the desperation in the woman's voice. "He's safe," Clara whispered, her voice full of tenderness and relief. "I've got him." The woman let out a faint sigh, a sound filled with a momentary spark of relief. Even in her weak state, it seemed as though she found some comfort in Clara's words. Rex, the loyal German shepherd, pressed his warm body against the woman's side, curling as close to her as possible. His body was solid and steadfast against the chill of the cabin, offering what little comfort he could. Rex's steady breathing was the only sound other than the howling wind, and he didn't flinch or hesitate as the situation intensified. He knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a helpless dog. This was a soldier driven by purpose. He didn't move, didn't falter. He knew that time was running out. Margaret's gaze swept the shack once more, the crude walls groaning as the storm raged against them. Her eyes flickered to the cracks where the wind howled through, bringing the storm's fury inside. "We can't." "Stay here," Margaret muttered, her voice a sharp cut through the howling wind. "If we don't move now, they won't make it." With a surge of effort, Margaret lifted the woman's weight, looping her arms under her shoulders and knees. The woman's body felt light in Margaret's grip, but the emptiness wasn't because it was easy to carry. No, it was because the woman had so little strength left in her. The faintness of her body felt like a weight in Margaret's chest. "Clara, stay right next to me," Margaret said, her voice calm but demanding. "We need to move now." Clara, pale but resolute, nodded without a word, clutching the baby close to her chest, her tiny frame dwarfed by the swirling storm. Margaret turned to Rex, the dog's eyes locking with hers as if waiting for a command. "All right, soldier," she said softly. "Lead us home." Rex barked once, low and firm, and then he turned and bolted into the storm. The moment they stepped outside, the storm swallowed them whole. The cold wasn't just biting. It was alive, trying to tear through them, clawing at every inch of exposed skin like a beast determined to drag them back into its frozen jaws. Margaret tightened her grip on the limp woman in her arms, the weight of the body pressing against her with every step, reminding her of the life they were fighting for. But with each step she took, fear dug deeper into her chest. The woman felt weightless, and that terrified Margaret. Weightless meant weakness. Weightless meant fading. "Stay close, Clara," Margaret's voice cracked through the roaring wind. Rough against the shriek of the storm, Clara didn't respond in words, but her tiny shoulders squared against the gale, her body fighting against the storm with determination. She held the baby tightly, tucked under her coat, her face set in a grim expression of focus and fear. Ahead of them, Rex moved like a shadow in the storm, a single streak of purpose cutting through the chaos. His movements were precise, each one commanding them forward. He didn't bark now. He didn't need to. Every step he took was a command in itself, an instruction that left no room for hesitation. Follow, keep up. Don't stop. Margaret's lungs burned as the icy air sliced through every breath she took, each inhale a fight to stay alive. Her boots sank deep into the snow, the ground pulling at her legs as if the earth itself wanted to drag them down. Her body screamed at her to stop, to rest, but Margaret's mind pushed her forward. One more step, just one more. There was no stopping now. Not until they reached safety. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed into them, and Clara's boots slipped on hidden ice beneath the snow. She cried out as her body pitched forward, her knees buckling under the force. The baby pressed desperately against her chest, his tiny form held only by her arms. "Clara!" Margaret's voice shattered through the storm, but before she could react, Rex was there. The dog darted back, his teeth catching the edge of Clara's coat. With strength that belied his size, Rex braced his body, pulling her upright just before she would have been lost to the drift. Clara's voice trembled as she regained her balance. "I'm okay. I've got him," she stammered, holding the baby tightly. Margaret exhaled sharply, relief flooding her chest. "Keep moving, sweetheart. We're almost there." But the storm wasn't done testing them. Margaret's boots sank deep into the snow again. But this time it didn't stop. Her leg plunged into a hidden crevice, sending a sharp cry from her lips as pain shot up her calf. The woman in her arms shifted dangerously, almost slipping from her grasp. "Grandma!" Clara screamed. "Stay back." Margaret ground it out through gritted teeth, her voice taut with pain. Rex barked frantically, circling around Margaret before he started digging feverishly at the snow. Clara knelt beside him, her hands scrambling through the snow, desperately trying to free Margaret. With one last wrench, Margaret freed herself, biting back a groan of pain as she staggered upright. They couldn't be far from the cabin now. It had to be close. "Come on." Clara's voice broke through the wind, full of desperation, but also determination. "We're almost there." The light from the porch finally pierced through the storm, faint but unmistakable. Margaret's heart leaped. In her chest, the flood of relief so overwhelming it nearly brought her to her knees. They weren't safe yet, but that light, it wasn't just a cabin. It was hope. It was survival. With the last of her strength, Margaret stumbled forward, dragging them closer with each painful step. Every movement felt like an eternity, but she wouldn't stop. They couldn't stop. The cabin doors slammed shut behind them, and the storm was shut out as quickly as it had swallowed them whole. For one heartbeat, there was only silence, broken by Margaret's labored breathing and Clara's quick, trembling gasps. Blankets. Margaret barked, her voice snapping through the stillness of the cabin. Clara didn't hesitate. She darted to the couch, gathering every blanket she could find, and rushed back to Margaret's side. With shaking hands, Clara unzipped her coat, revealing the tiny baby nestled against her chest. His skin was cold, his breath faint, but still. There, Margaret carefully lowered the woman onto the rug near the fire, her fingers already moving with mechanical precision. She wrapped a thermal blanket tightly around the woman's frail body and began rubbing her arms and legs, desperately trying to coax life back into frozen muscles. The baby let out a weak cry, so fragile it nearly broke Clara's heart. She leaned in close, whispering, "You're safe now, you're safe." Margaret's jaw tightened as she checked the woman's pulse. It was faint, struggling, but it was there. "Come on, don't you quit on me," she muttered, leaning in close to the woman's face. "You've made it this far. Stay with us." Rex pressed himself against the woman's side, his body radiating warmth, his eyes locked on her pale face as, though he could will her back to life, a faint twitch. Margaret froze, her hands still moving over the woman's arms. Then, with a shallow inhale, the woman's lips parted and a cracked whisper escaped. "Baby ... Clara cradled the infant even. Closer, her voice trembling but strong. "He's right here. He's safe." A single tear slipped down the woman's cheek, and for the first time in hours, Margaret allowed herself to exhale the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They weren't safe yet, not entirely. But hope had returned to the cabin, for hours after Hannah's faint whisper, the cabin was filled with nothing but the sound of steady breathing, the crackle of the fire, and the soft murmur of Clara as she held the baby close. Margaret stayed by Hannah's side, her hands never leaving her, willing warmth back into her. The storm outside raged on, but inside there was a fragile calm, a sense of life returning. By morning, the worst of the storm had passed. Pale sunlight filtered through the frost-covered window, spilling a gentle golden hue across the room. Clara held the baby close to the soft light, whispering, "He made it through the storm." "Grandma, he's our hope. That should be his name." From the blanket, Hannah stirred, her tired eyes finding her child. A tear slipped free, and a faint smile trembled across her lips. "Hope," she breathed. "Yes, that's who he is." Rex lay pressed against her side, his head lifting slightly as he let out a low, contented whine as if he understood. When the roads finally cleared and the cabin door opened to a world of white, The story had already begun to spread of a retired canine braving a blizzard to save a mother and child, and a grandmother and her 12-year-old granddaughter answering a call for life in the heart of a storm. Weeks later, Hannah stood on the porch of a small home the town had gifted her, snow melting under the first touch of spring. In her arms, baby Hope stirred, his tiny fingers curling into the warmth of the sun. She looked down at Rex, lying at her feet, her voice breaking with emotion. "Thank you, Rex, for giving us more than life. You gave us a future." And in that quiet moment, the words felt heavier than any promise because they were the truth.